A man loved his wife unconditionally and she cheated on him right after that. When Adam met Lauren, everything seemed right. They were young, full of dreams and hopes, and no one could have predicted how complicated and confusing their future would become. They settled in a small house in the suburbs of Seattle, where the evenings smelled of rain, and the windows always misted over with the warm breath of family happiness. Adam worked for a construction company, but then moved on to a small but stable business. Lauren stayed home with the children, taking care of every detail in the house, creating a coziness and warmth that enveloped everyone who crossed the threshold. They had 2 sons, Noah and Caleb. Noah was older, more thoughtful, and so like his father. In everything, in his manner of silence, you have to think, in his habit of sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee early in the morning, even in the way he looked at the sky. Caleb was younger and more like his mother, emotional, impulsive, always seeking attention and warmth, as if afraid of being left alone. Years passed, and Adam continued to build his business. He worked from morning until late at night, often returning home when the children were already asleep. Lauren began to move away. Her gaze lost its sparkle, her smile became rare, and conversations were reduced to the necessary minimum. Adam did not notice this right away. He thought it was just fatigue. That winters in their place were always like this, cold and silent. One day Lauren turned to him with a request to help her sister Jenny. She had lost her job and needed a temporary break. Adam did not object. He respected his wife's family, and Jenny always seemed to him to be a kind, intelligent girl. Over time, she began to come to work for Adam, doing office work, answering calls, keeping records, helping clients. Lauren began to change. She seemed to look for evidence in every word, in every look. Adam didn't understand what exactly had changed, but he felt that a wall had appeared between them, through which he could neither look nor shout. One evening, when he returned, Lauren was gone. Disappeared with Caleb. Only a note left on the kitchen table explained everything. She had seen him, she couldn't take it anymore. She didn't believe. Adam held that note in his hands, looked at the uneven literature that his Lauren had written, and didn't understand how it was possible to leave everything so easily, their home, memories, love, life. Noah stayed with him. He didn't say a word that evening. He just sat down next to him and put his head on his father's shoulder. There was more pain in that silence than in any tears. The first few weeks after she left were like wandering in a fog. Adam lived by inertia, waking up, working, having dinner with Noah in silence, and falling asleep in the room that had once belonged to them both. Memories of Lauren were everywhere, on the old blanket she was sewing, on the mirror, which still had a trace of her perfume, in the kitchen cabinet where she kept her favorite spices. Jenny quit a week after Lauren left. She didn't explain why, she just said she couldn't work here anymore. Adam just nodded. It didn't matter to him what she thought. What mattered was finding a way to get at least some of his life back. Noah shut himself away. He went to school, came home, helped his father at work, but he never spoke of his mother or Caleb again. Adam could see how it was eating away at his son from the inside, but he didn't know how to stop it. He wrote Lauren letters. Not because he believed she would come back, but because it was the only way he could keep from going crazy. He wrote about home, about work, about Noah, about how he missed Caleb. How every day his imagination heard the laughter of his youngest son. There was no answer. Her social media profile was silent, the address remained invalid, and the phone was forever silent. A year later, he learned that she had moved to another city, almost 1,500 miles away. One of Jenny's former colleagues accidentally mentioned this in a conversation. Adam did not go there. He knew that to ruin her new life would mean losing his last chance to ever see Caleb happy. Years passed. Noah grew up and went to college. Adam was left alone in a large, too quiet house. He continued to work, although business was no longer the meaning of his life. He often dreamed of Caleb. In his dreams, he was small, as before, playing in the yard, calling his father to him. Sometimes Adam woke up with tears, and it felt like he had just held his son in his arms, but he had slipped away. One day he received a letter. A simple envelope without a return address. It contained a child's drawing, 2 men, one tall, the other shorter, and the signature was Dad and me. On the back was a short line written in a child's hand, "I remember you." Adam unfolded the drawing and looked at it for a long time, not knowing how to keep his heart from pain and joy. At the same time, after that letter, something changed in him. He began to live a little differently. He returned to drawing, which he had been fond of in his youth. Every Sunday he would sit in the studio, where the box with his children's drawings was kept, and create a new picture. In each one was a memory, a dream, a hope. Sometimes he sent postcards with pictures to the same address the letter came from. He didn't know if they would get through, but he felt that this was his way of talking to Caleb. A few more years passed. One evening, when the sky had turned black earlier than usual, the doorbell rang. Adam wasn't expecting anyone. A young man stood on the threshold, a thin man with a determined look and a somewhat familiar face. He silently held out an envelope. Adam opened it immediately. There was a photograph inside of himself, many years ago, with little Caleb on his shoulders. And another line, "I'm here." For the first time in a long time, the house was filled with laughter again. Noah came for the weekend. The brothers hugged, and Adam watched them, as if afraid that it was just an illusion. But everything was real. Their life had not become perfect. Lauren never returned. But something new was being born in these meetings. The pain remained. But with it came a place for forgiveness. And although time could no longer be turned back, Adam finally felt that all was not lost. When Caleb reappeared in Adam's life, it wasn't a fairy tale reboot. Everything was different. From the childhood drawings and fantasies, the real Caleb was already an adult, with his own character, experience, and anger that remained deep in his eyes. But he came, and that was enough. Adam didn't ask about Lauren, didn't try to extract the truth or find out the reasons. He was just there. He made breakfast, left his son's favorite cookies on the kitchen table, which he remembered from childhood. He created a silence in which Caleb could breathe. Noah came more often. A connection developed between the brothers, but a different one. Not the same as in childhood, when they ran around the hallway in their pajamas. Now it was something more restrained, silent, but deep. They sat next to each other and played an old console that Adam kept in the garage. Sometimes Caleb brought old photos with him, from the time they lived with their mother. They looked at the pictures in silence, like pieces of a mosaic they were trying to piece together. Adam saw that his sons sometimes talked about him when he left the room. He didn't take offense. He knew that each of them carried his own story of loss and doubt. Sometimes Caleb would disappear for days. He didn't warn them, he didn't explain. Adam didn't ask them, he didn't bother them. But he always left the lamp on in the room, a sign that he was expected there. One morning Adam woke up earlier than usual and heard noises coming from the old barn. As he got closer, he saw Caleb with a paintbrush in his hand. His son was standing in front. of a canvas that his father had started and abandoned years earlier. The picture was unfinished, the father and two children, but the face of one of them was only outlined in lines. Caleb was painting that face. Slowly, intently, breathing in the scent of paint and wood. Adam said nothing. He simply walked over, sat down on an old bench, and watched as his son, shade by shade, brought a piece of their past back to life. Eventually, Caleb moved in nearby. He found work in a small studio where he worked with children, teaching them how to draw. Adam went with him to art shows, where he saw the colors of his heart in the paintings, deep blues like memories, yellows like hope, and reds like pain turned into strength. Noah changed too. After entering graduate school, he began studying psychology. The wounds left in him by the loss of his mother and the split in his family turned into an impulse to help others. He returned to his father and brother every weekend. They had dinner together, told stories from the past, laughed in moments where, not long ago, there had been only silence. Adam lived differently. He no longer wanted to turn back time. Now he was building something else, simple, peaceful, warm. He planted trees in the yard, each one symbolizing a new spring. He watched as the children, once separated by pain, stood together again. Sometimes he thought of Lauren. Not with hatred, not with anger, but with quiet sadness. She remained a part of his life, like a book that had once been read every night and then put on a shelf. He didn't look for her. He just let her go. One evening, as the wind stirred the curtains in the living room, Adam sat in the rocking chair, and Caleb was next to him, reading letters that his father had written many years ago. They were preserved in a box that Adam had long hidden in the attic. And in each letter the same note sounded: love that had not disappeared, no matter what. Now she was all around him. In the drawings, in the evening conversations, in the silence. That was no longer feared. And although the past had left scars, now they were not painful wounds, but reminders that even from the fragments, something new can be built deeper, stronger, more real. The life that Adam had once considered shattered had become no less real than it had been before his loss. He no longer had to fight the silence, it had become his ally. In the morning, he would wake up with the thought not of emptiness, but of the fact that every day, even the gray and unhurried one, carried something valuable. He no longer expected change, he lived in it. Caleb, despite his young age, had an extraordinary depth. Sometimes it seemed as if his eyes had seen more than a child should have seen. His drawings were becoming popular. One of his series, inspired by his father's letters, was a great success. People saw emotions in the paintings that needed no words. After each exhibition, he would return home and sit in the garden next to his father, silently reviewing pictures of his work. He did not say that he was proud. But Adam could feel it in the way Caleb left his paints around the house, as if he were trying to leave something behind. Noah, even though he was older, began to reach out to his younger brother more often. Their relationship became a source of support for both of them. Whenever Noah felt tired or unsure, he would come to his father's house, and they would all cook dinner together, look through old photo albums, or go for long walks in the woods behind their yard. Their closeness was no longer based on children's games, but on a shared experience of survival, loss, search, acceptance. Adam began to keep a journal. Not because he was afraid of forgetting something, but because he learned to notice things he hadn't seen before. The smell of fresh bread when Caleb was baking something. The slight tilt of Noah's head when he was reading something intently. Even the sound of the rain drumming on the window as the three of them sat in silence, it all had weight again. His notes weren't philosophical or profound, more like small notes about a life that had returned. One day, Noah announced that he wanted to return to his hometown and open a support center for teenagers. He wasn't looking for fame or recognition. He simply wanted to create a place where someone else, just as confused, could feel less alone. Caleb agreed to help decorating the interior, painting the walls with his own artwork, each of which contained a hidden story. Adam didn't try to contain his pride. He stood aside and watched as his sons, born in pain, turned everything they had to endure into something meaningful and useful. Years passed. Adam's hair turned gray, his hands became less sure, his eyesight faded. But inside he felt something he hadn't felt even in his youth, a completeness. Every day was peaceful. He no longer waited for an apology from Lauren, no longer looked for her shadows in other people's faces. Sometimes he dreamed of her, a different, calmer, unscathed. He didn't know where she was or what was wrong with her, but he no longer held grudges. His heart had learned to let go. His latest project was a book. Adam decided to print all his letters, Caleb's drawings, and diary entries. He didn't think it would become a bestseller. It was a gift to his sons, to himself, to those who were lost and looking for a way out. In the foreword, he wrote that this story was not about loss, but about how everything that had been destroyed could one day bloom again, if given time. On the days when his sons came to visit, they would sit together on the terrace, listening to the birds and watching the sky change. They were no longer afraid of silence. It had become their mutual friend. And there was something in that silence that was hard to explain in words, a feeling that even after the darkest period, light always appears. Over time, Adam's house became like a small center of attraction. Not only his sons came to visit, but also their friends, colleagues, acquaintances who had heard about the quiet man with deep eyes who had once written a book about loss and hope. His home, surrounded by trees and old benches, gradually became a space where people found answers, not to all their questions, but at least to one: is it possible to start over? Caleb opened an art school nearby. He named it after one of the first drawings he had made while drawing in his father's barn. Within the walls of the school, he allowed children and adults to simply be themselves, without pressure, without rules. He said that paint heals. His paintings hung in every classroom, but the most precious of them remained in his father's house, the one on which he had finished painting a child's unfinished face. Noah, however, chose a different path. His center of help began to grow. Teenagers with difficult fates came there, from broken families, with rebellious hearts. He did not give them simple advice, but listened as Adam listened to him on that first evening when his son dared to talk about his pain. In one of Noah's offices, he set up a small library. There was also his father's book. On the first page of each copy, he wrote words of support with his own hand, because he believed that even the printed word could save someone. One summer, a new resident appeared in Adam's house. Her name was Grace. She was neither a wife nor a lover, but rather an old friend of her youth, who had once disappeared and now returned because she was tired of the noise of the big city. Grace did not ask about the past, did not try to take someone's role. She simply drank tea on the terrace, read books, and planted new flowers. Her presence was as light as breathing. Adam felt that sometimes the silence between two people could say more than 1,000 words. One rainy evening there was a knock on the door. It was a woman, a stranger, confused. She was holding a copy of Adam's book, the pages of which were crumpled and stained with tears. She said she had read it when she was on the verge of death, and it had saved her life. She wanted nothing more than to say thank you. Then there were the people. Readers, wanderers, young mothers, old men. They came to the house to be near. Adam did not reveal any secrets to them. He only poured tea and left his notes next to them. Each found something of his own in them. Caleb fell in love. Her name was Lily. She worked in a library and collected letters from strangers who left messages in books. She showed Caleb one of these notes. It was an excerpt from Adam's book. Together they began to create a project, art in words, colors, and stories. Anything that could restore people's faith in themselves. In their new home, there was a painting of 3 figures standing in the middle of a golden field. It was their family, without unnecessary features, but with indescribable warmth. Noah married later. His wife worked with teenagers who had run away from home. Together, they created a shelter. Adam often came there, planted trees in the yard, and told the young men how one day he too had been lost. And every time one of those children stayed behind, he found a roof over his head. Adam felt his heart fill not with the bitterness of loss, but with the peace of victory. Old age came slowly, but it did not frighten. Everything that was supposed to happen had already happened. Now there were movie nights, to which the grandchildren came. Caleb and Noah brought their children, and Adam taught them not with words, but with silence, how to listen to the heart, how to breathe when it seemed there was no air. They listened, not realizing that this was the most valuable thing their grandfather could convey. Sometimes letters came from Lauren. She didn't ask for a return. She simply wrote about life, about old age, about memories. Adam kept these letters in a shoebox, without rereading them. He no longer looked for answers. He had already found them. And one day, when the wind shook the trees and the sky was leaning toward the west, Adam closed his eyes on a bench under an old oak tree. His hands were folded on his chest, his breathing was even, his heart was quiet. He left as he had lived his last years, without noise, with peace in his soul. After the funeral, which was held quietly, without speeches or flowers, as he had requested, Adam's house stood empty for a long time. Caleb and Noah did not dare to go in right away. For them, it was more than just a house, it was a living part of their father. When they finally entered, everything was as if he had just gone for a walk, a cup on the table, an open book, old glasses next to him, and on the wall was the same drawing of 3 people standing in the middle of a golden field. Caleb returned here first. He took a few things, his father's diary, letters he had received, drawings that Adam had never hung up. Then he invited Lily and the children, and they decided to turn the house into an artistic and emotional center. But not a museum. Not a memorial. But a living place. They spent weeks of silence there, for those who needed a reboot. They taught not just to draw, but to listen to themselves. There was a bench in the garden where Adam liked to sit. People came to be silent there. And that was enough for something to change in them. Noah focused on expanding the shelter. His wife helped with the administration, and he held meetings with teenagers and adults who were afraid to return to the world. He learned to speak not as a psychologist, but as someone who had also once stood at a crossroads. Words from Adam's book hung in many rooms. People quoted them on social networks, wrote them on postcards, left them in books, as Lily had once done. Over the years, Adam's story turned into something more. His book became part of the curricula in schools and universities. It didn't just tell about betrayal, pain, and recovery, it taught how to live with loss. Several times they wanted to make the story into a film, but their sons refused. They didn't want it to become another drama on the screens. They wanted it to remain alive in their hearts. Caleb's children began to draw. One with a black pencil, the other with only white, as if the Light and shadow of their father's soul had been transferred to them. In the room where Adam wrote his diaries, they set up a projector. Words, phrases, notes ran on the walls like beacons of memory. They held memorial evenings there, where people could read their letters to those they had lost. Noah became a father to dozens of children who needed at least someone who wouldn't betray them. And every time someone asked how he managed to stay so strong after everything, he answered simply, "My father once wrote that even from ashes you can build a garden." Many years later, another oak tree appeared in Adam's garden. It was planted by his great-grandson. The boy didn't remember anything about his great-grandfather, but he knew that he had once saved this family. Under the oak tree was a small plaque with just one sentence: "The strongest tree grows where the deepest wound once burned." And as the wind swayed the branches, they whispered something very familiar. It was as if Adam himself continued to speak, not with words, but with his presence. And now the others were learning to listen silently to what was truly important. Miles was 17, and he felt like the world had cracked. He was Caleb's oldest son, had a name that his grandmother Lauren had once liked, and had always seemed like a calm boy. But inside him, something deep and heavy was churning, a mixture of fear, confusion, and the pressure of expectations. He was an artist, like his father, like everyone in the family, it seemed. But he didn't feel strong enough to create anything real. Every painting felt fake. Every stroke felt out of place. And then his first failure. He hadn't been accepted to a prestigious art academy. He silently folded his files, said nothing to his parents or his brother, and disappeared for a few days. He drove to his great-grandfather's house, the one that had already become a center of silence, but then it stood empty. The administrator left him the keys without asking. Miles locked himself in there. He looked at the paintings, read the notes, listened to the wind. And he found something strange: an old box hidden under a bookcase. It contained sheets of paper he didn't know, Adam's notes that hadn't yet made it into a book. They were incomplete, fragmentary, like secret thoughts that weren't meant for anyone. On one sheet of paper it was written, "There are moments when you don't believe in yourself. But it's worth taking a step even if it's blind, because around the next bend there's often not an abyss, but a new road." Miles reread these words over and over. Then he spread out his paints. For the first time in a long time, he began to paint not for a reception, not for an exhibition, just for himself. His painting turned out strange: a broken tree in the middle of an empty field, and in its shadow was a small shoot. Miles himself didn't understand why he was painting this, but he felt something inside him shift. He stayed there for a week. When he got home, his father didn't ask anything. He just hugged him. And Miles himself decided to hang his painting in the same room where the projector with Adam's phrases used to stand. And on the back of the canvas he wrote his words, the first real, sincere ones: "I'm not a tree yet, but I'm already sprouting." From that time on, he began to help at the center where Noah worked. Not as an artist, but as a guy who had once almost broken down. He talked to those who were afraid to return home, wrote letters that he put in books, just as Lily had once done. Each of them contained phrases from Adam's notes, but transformed in his own way, his grandson's. His words were not loud, but they exuded warmth. When Miles became an adult, he wrote a book. Not a novel, but something on the verge of a diary, letters, and memories. He called it Growing Up and dedicated it to the one who once taught me to be silent so that I could hear myself better. The book became popular among teenagers. It was read in schools, studied in psychology departments, and in every copy, on The very last page, Miles wrote by hand, "You are not alone. If it seems to you that life is falling apart, it is only a pause before germination." The family story did not end. It sprouted new shoots, branched out. Centers inspired by Adam's legacy appeared in other cities. The children and grandchildren did not carry the burden of the name, they carried the light. Everyone knew who Adam was. But more importantly, who he had become for them, roots that held even in a storm. And when evening came, and the wind shook the oak trees in the courtyard of the old house, a new generation would go out to the bench where Adam had once sat and silently look up at the sky. Because that is how, in silence, truth was born. Many years passed. The world changed, new generations grew up, cities grew, technology swallowed old habits, but some things remained the same. Stories real, painful, living, outlived those who created them. Such was the story of Adam, a man who once lost, and then taught others to find. His great-grandson Miles, now an adult with gray hair at his temples, carried more than just memory. He carried the essence. After the publication of his book Growing Up, which became a silent manifesto for the younger generation, he did not seek fame. He opened small art centers in forgotten towns, supported teenagers who had experienced loss, despair, depression. And, despite everything, he maintained simplicity in his words and depth in his gaze. His daughter Avril grew up, and with each passing year she resembled Lily more and more. The same woman who had once been not only a salvation for Adam, but also the truth. Avril was calm, independent, inquisitive. She was fascinated by architecture and often asked her father, "How do you know when it's time to destroy something and when to save it?" Miles did not have a universal answer, but one day he took her to where it all began, to Adam's old house. Now it was not just a private estate. There was a memorial center, a museum, a workshop. But one room remained almost untouched, the old living room with a bench by the window and a projector showing phrases from Adam's personal diary. Avril walked down the corridor, silently touched the wall, and a feeling of deep kinship suddenly appeared in her eyes. She had never known Adam, but his story flowed in her blood. She knew it was time to ask more. That was when Miles had told her everything for the first time. About Lauren's betrayal. About the loss, about the split in the family. About the time Adam was left alone, and how he refused to break himself for revenge. How he had rebuilt everything. How he had forgiven. Avril was silent for a long time, and then she said, "So in our story, love is not always tenderness. It is a choice. Sometimes the most painful." Miles smiled. At that moment, he realized that his daughter was the bearer of a new chapter. Sometime later, Lauren, now a much older woman, lived in a small house on the shore. She did not wait for anyone, did not ask for forgiveness. She simply lived. But the past buzzed in her dreams. When Miles appeared on her doorstep one day, she was confused. They were silent for a long time, and only an hour later did she say, "I was afraid that everyone had forgotten me." But even more so, that they remembered. The trip back to Adam's house was a pilgrimage for her. When she entered, she couldn't take a step. But Avril took her hand. And that small detail, the touch of a generation that doesn't judge, changed everything. Lauren walked over to the bench, sat down, and a look of something between pain and relief crossed her face. She didn't cry. She simply allowed herself to be alive again. That same year, she died. Without pain. In her sleep. She was buried next to Adam, not by a court order or formality, but by the agreement of hearts. It was an act of love, not an excuse. Two simple stones were placed next to their graves. One read, "He didn't break." And the other, "She could come back." But the story didn't end there. It found new hands. Avril, who had become interested in archives after her great-grandmother died, found something special. An old tape, a short video recording that Adam made for himself. On it, he spoke to the future. He sat on the same bench, with the same calm face. And he said, "If you are watching this, then you are my heir. Not by blood, but by heart. I did not leave you a fortune, only an example. Destroy it if you must. Forgive if you can. But never end your story with sadness. Because even when a door closes, a window appears, and behind it a new light. And, please, do not be afraid of love. It is the only thing that remains with us forever." Avril played this video on a big screen during an exhibition dedicated to Adam's memory. Dozens of people were sitting in the hall: students, teachers, artists, social workers. And everyone was crying. Because these words were not just the story of a family. They were the story of everyone who had lost at least once, but wanted to live on. And a year later, when Avril became an architect, she created a building open, bright, with panoramic glass. A recovery center for women and children who had experienced losses. In the center, in the very heart, there was a bench. On it was an inscription: "Sit down. Breathe. And start your story again." And when one day her daughter, still very young, asked, "What happened before us?" Avril hugged her and answered, "There was pain. There were mistakes. But the main thing, there was a choice. And we made it right."